The Austin, Texas Pig War. In 1840, a French diplomat named Jean-Pierre Isidore Alphonse Dubois arrived in Austin, Texas. A few blocks from his hotel were a group of pigs kept by a local hog farmer, and they soon discovered the Frenchman fed his horses corn. The pigs invaded his quarters and apparently ate his linens and important state papers. He declared war on the pigs, and the city joined in on the roast. Chicago's secret graveyard park. Lincoln Park is known as one of Chicago's wealthiest, nicest neighborhoods. But after the Civil War, there were so many dead bodies sent back to Chicago, they didn't know what to do with them. Many were buried in unmarked graves under land that eventually became Lincoln Park. Some of the bodies were removed, but the Windy City's nicest park is still secretly a graveyard. Tourists being assisted by their guides as they climb one of the pyramids at Giza in the 1890s. Tourism at the pyramids is thousands of years old, with people from the empires of Macedon, Rome, French, British, and many more coming to Egypt to see them. They climbed them, took pieces, and this was before the sites were even excavated. Eventually, in the 1980s, Egypt stopped people from climbing them, as such wear and tear was causing significant damage to the outsides of the pyramids. It can be possible to still do so, perhaps with a pass for a fee, but not freely and easily as it was before the restrictions. A man walks by a dead whale after the Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska, U.S. in 1989. During the disaster, nearly 11 million gallons of crude oil spilled into the ocean. Nearly 1,300 square miles was covered in oil. This disaster caused the deaths of up to 250,000 seabirds, around 2,800 sea otters, approximately 12 river otters, 300 harbor seals, 247 bald eagles, and 22 orcas, and an unknown number of salmon and herring. People head to see the Olympics in Berlin, Germany in 1936. Germany won the rights to host the Games in 1931, and the Third Reich planned it to be the greatest public event in history at that time. Other countries even considered boycotted the Games, fearful of what Germany would do with their propaganda if they did well at the Games. The University of Michigan playing Michigan State University in American football in Michigan, U.S. in 1913. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, clubs and colleges started changing the rules of American rugby, which developed into American football. Armenians, mostly children, wait to be deported in Malatya, Turkey, in 1918 during the Armenian Genocide. Similar to what the Germans did with Hungarian Jews, at the end of World War II, the Ottoman Turks sped up efforts to kill as many Armenians as possible in 1918 before the war ended. In 1905, the rocks and dirt left over from a tunnel construction were dumped in the East River, and an artificial island was born. First known as Belmont Island, a guru employed by the UN bought it in 1977 and declared it U Thant Island, named after his friend, Burmese diplomat U Thant. Businessmen from around the world are entertained by a dancer in Paris, France, in 1958. Paris has been a key city for entertainment not seen around the world for hundreds of years, and the 1950s was no different. The very first Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, New York City, 1931. The 1950 FIFA World Cup final between Brazil and Uruguay in the Maracanã Stadium. Spectated officially by 173,850 people and possibly by over 200,000, this remains the most attended football match ever. Judy Garland and her young co-star Margaret O'Brien as seen during Meet Me in St. Louis, one of the year's highest-grossing films. Women mud wrestle at the Sandbox Lounge in Phoenix, Arizona in 1980. During the late 1970s and 1980s, many clubs came up with weird ways to entertain clients besides just attractive women stripping. The streets of Moscow, Russia, during the Great Moscow Flood in 1908. Much of the city flooded, but it wasn't that deadly, mostly affecting the poor when it comes to deaths. It heavily impacted basic movement, however, and caused the Russian Empire to make additions to the drainage of the Moskva River to prevent it from flooding again. When photography was invented in the 1820s, California hadn't even been awarded statehood. Mexico had control of the region, and the very first organized group of American settlers wouldn't arrive until 1841. January 24, 1848, became an auspicious day in Californian history when gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill. This moment marked the onset of the California Gold Rush and triggered the largest mass migration event in U.S. history. Two Americans pose with a Chinese man and woman, far left and far right, a Japanese woman and her baby, center, and a Filipino woman and her baby in the Philippines in 1902. The Lawson coal mine after a major explosion had killed 16 miners, 5 of which were never recovered, in Washington State, U.S. in 1910. The Transcontinental Railroad enabled rapid travel across North America and helped the U.S. become one of the world's most powerful economies by the end of the 19th century. When this photo was taken in 1868 or 1869, the notorious prison on Alcatraz Island was still a long way off, incarcerating the likes of mobster Al Capone and murderer-turned-ornithologist Robert Stroud. Instead, it was being used as a military prison, which held Confederate sympathizers and those accused of treason during the American Civil War, 1861–65. Held on Independence Day, July 4, 1871, the first civic parade in Los Angeles was an opportunity for the city's residents and public servants to come together for a day of celebrations. It wasn't until 2014 that the U.S. Labor Department formally recognized the Chinese immigrants that helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. As many as 20,000 worked on the Central Pacific Railroad between 1865 and 1869. By the 1870s, almost all 63,000 Chinese immigrants were based in California, with a large community forming in San Francisco. Opium was introduced to America with the wave of Chinese immigration, and by the late 1880s, it was estimated that around 300 opium dens were operating in San Francisco alone.